Hello, ladies and gentlemen, I'm your host, AirsoftAL, and I welcome you, of course, to the lore page, which, of course, is basically the information network, which is the lore behind the story, which is basically just the story behind all the airsoft battles we have, which I know a lot of you have been asking me what's been going on with the story, what's going on, etc., etc., and yes, there has been a canonical or at least a chronological update to the actual story itself, which has changed a lot over the years that it has gone through. And now we have a more concentrated, much more satirical story that we have. However, we do try our best to avoid any actual recent events in human history, such as the terrorist attacks and Antifa, to try and not offend the families of dead and or injured. I am actually considerate about the dead, you jackasses. Anyway, so I'm going to give you a full chronological and, of course, canonical timeline to follow, and I hope you guys do follow along. So, let me set the mood for you. It's the 80s, the time of computer and robots and awesome music is coming around. There has come, and computers are on the rise. However, many believe that they cannot handle the millennia when it happens. Many fear that computers will not turn over when 1999 passes. They fear that something will happen. So, government officials and many scientists decide to stockpile technology and hide away in bunkers when the 90s roll around, waiting for that fateful day. So, the time and events continue on as normal. However, New Year's Eve 1999 rolls around. However, in the year when 1999 did come around, there were small glitches in the computer, just tiny ones. Maybe a number or two didn't calculate correctly. Maybe a payment was missed on a bill, and some phone lines maybe not so good. And, of course, some floppy disk maybe didn't load up correctly. Your favorite game of Doom. No one knows why. Then, 1999 of New Year's Eve. Everyone is ready and set to celebrate the millennia, while many hide in bunkers waiting for the inevitable. Now, in our timeline, 1999 just kind of came and went. We, in all honesty, just didn't think anything of it. I mean, I remember 1999 clearly. I remember two of my uncles, one getting his drunk off his ass, just over here saying, "I ain't gonna happen." And the other one's over here in a fetal position going like, "The world's gonna end, man! World's gonna end, man! Game over, man!" And I'm over here playing on my trains, just thinking nothing of it. So, what happened in this timeline? Midnight struck, but the computers did not turn over. Everything shut down. Massive blackouts happened. Mass hysteria. Cats and dogs living together. I'm talking biblical shit just happened.
Fuck! What's happening out there?
And what happened? What follows is what happens. Between 2000 and 2001, there is crime waves of unprecedented value. Gangs become crime lords. Well, correction. Gangs control the streets. The gang leaders become warlords. And the government is nowhere to be found or heard of. And for the people in Texas, this was the sign they were waiting for. For a simple governor became president that night and reformed the Republic of Texas, made it stronger, called out to his people and said, My fellow Texans, the night is a sign from God that Texas should lead the United States back to what it was. And they did. For March of 2000, many militia forces formed together along with the police to form a military for Texas, where they went into the streets and cleaned them up, rounded up all the warlords, executed them, and began to unify what was the United States, what was a separate congregation of towns and masses under one flag, one symbol, the Lone Star State of Texas. So I know what you're thinking. You're automatically thinking, okay, I can see what's going on here. Well, after the Republic of Texas began to completely and utterly clean up the states and to say, they came across a radio signal when they came near Nevada, or at least the map here. The red line separates the three factions. They came across a radio signal in July of 2000, where it was playing Stars and Stripes Forever, where a old voice was heard, preaching about America again. The true America again.
This is John Henry Eden, your president. There are some things we should talk about, if that's all right. I've been thinking quite a bit lately about something we can all relate to, something that is unquestionably, inescapably American. I am referring, of course, to our great national pastime, baseball.
The colonial Americans was met, and a border was formed between the two factions. To the north, we have the colonial Americans, which is basically the Fallout's 50s. Let's go with that. And to the south, the Republic of Texas, the heroes of the story. And of course, in the center, Kentucky, Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee, we have the new Confederacy. Now, not much is known what happened between 2001 and 2009. In 2009, the new Confederacy became a religious monarchy when supposedly a coup happened, where the Confederate government could not feed its people, could not do anything, and such a military coup was held by the people to overthrow the Confederacy and basically put in a religious monarchy. One faction under God, more or less. Which is where the satire begins. In the most literal sense, we have three of the biggest stereotypes possible for a faction. To the north, we have the colonial Americans, which is America. And to the south, we have Texas, which is basically Texas. And of course, it's literally every single Texas stereotype possible, but it's actually working.
Fuck yeah! Coming again to save the motherfucking day, yeah, America! Fuck yeah! Freedom is the only...
Now, in the center of all this, we have a religious monarchy that is literally the biggest, evilest people. Where literally, if you go against the word of God, you are executed. In the most literal sense. So, think Nazi Germany, but the Vatican.
Gentlemen, we are Nazis.
Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil!
Und we will have war.
Sieg Heil!
Yeah, we're going that route, people. Now, after 2009, the borders were closed to the religious monarchy. No one was allowed into the state. No one was allowed into this, well, basically North Korea-ish faction. So the question comes down to, what will ever happen to it? Well, everyone just kind of forgot. except for the leaders and the militaries. They knew something was going to happen, so they began massing forces on their borders, preparing for any kind of attack. However, in 2012 of December, the day where one's fellow man is celebrated, where everyone came together in peace and harmony. In Austin, Texas, where many cameras and radio stations were listening in on the preachers, where the preacher began where he would, basically, give the message of peace to one's fellow man. However, this preacher was much different, for his clothes were ragged, and not of one of a Texas preacher. In fact, many preachers of this description were seen among many other parts of the Republic of Texas. And on that day is when the world stood still. For on December 25th, the preacher set off a bomb. For this was no preacher, but a agent of chaos from the religious monarchy. Many others began mass shootings and bombings in the Republic. However, unlike the colonial Americans, the Texans only saw this with shock and fear for a slight second. For that fear and shock was replaced with anger and rage that someone would dare attack the great Republic. And as such police officers, citizens grabbed up their arms, militia units began to form, and they fought back against the invaders, for on December 25th, it was known as the Battle for Texas, which only lasted 5 hours. This battle was a decisive blow and test to not only the religious monarchy basically finding out they fucked up, and basically poking a sleeping bear. No, they found out that when you push a Texan, you're going to ask for a big fat. For many heroes were seen that day. And as such, on December 28th, the Texas Congress signed a declaration of war against the religious monarchy who started this war, and began asking for soldiers. They asked for volunteers. Unlike the colonial Americans who basically draft your ass when you're the appropriate age, no. The Texans asked for volunteers, and they got them. 500,000 people signed up with the Texas Army, Air Force, Navy, and even the Rangers to fight the enemy of Texas and kick their ass back to hell where they belong, to get payback for what they did to the great Republic and her people. And as such, millions of men, women, sons, daughters, husbands, wives, all volunteered, began marching to the borders of the religious monarchy on the western, southern, and eastern front, each one being its own hell. The war began in 2013, where a massive invasion was launched. On the western front, Texas Air Force and Texas ground units began a massive air campaign as well as infantry campaign against the religious monarchy forces who were there. Hueys, F-16s, even heavy bombers began leveling the ground, while transport choppers came in and dropped off hundreds of thousands of Texas troopers who began to rush the fields of battle, cutting down any and all enemy who stood in their wake. This would be similar to the invasion of Vietnam, as well as a few other invasions. The South It was a massive beach landing campaign, as well as naval campaign, where the Texas Navy and Texan Army forces began a beach landing operation. Not as much, not since seen. Basically, this is a pretty big beach operation. Basically, in the most literal sense, they are sending landing craft up to the beachheads. Kind of like this.
That's just fine with me! Yeah! No way anybody's still alive on that joint!
Wouldn't count on that if I was you! Any of you new guys feel like throwing up? Word of advice! Do it now! Tommy! I'll see you on the beach!
And you're automatically thinking, well, how bad did it go if this is something like Normandy, basically? Something like this. It was bad. The forces, Texas forces who were landing on the beaches, were stuck there for 3 hours until an unknown soldier picked up a radio and said over the lines that we are fighting for Texas, victory or death. At which point the soldier could not be found after the battle was won. And amphibious as well as mechanized forces began to push their way up from the south into both the Alabama in the Alabama and Mississippi territories. The biggest of the naval forces coming from the port city of New Orleans. Now, on the Eastern Front, mechanized infantry forces began to push, driving the enemy forces far because the religious monarchy and their idiocracy thought that the majority of the Texas forces would be coming from the south and the west, not from the east. Yeah, you can already tell these idiots, basically. As this is going on, I should have mentioned that before everything had gone down, there were paratroopers, there were air troopers who were basically dropped behind enemy lines, much like the D-Day operation from the 1940s. Many paratroopers from the Texas Airborne were dropped behind enemy lines to try and disrupt supply lines and make it easier for the invading forces. However, on the Eastern Front, the way that the Texan forces were stopped was a day of infamy. For when they took a city called Pigeon Forge, it was a fight they were ready for. But they were stopped after a mysterious yellow gas cloud, a mysterious yellow cloud that hung close to the earth began to creep across the battlefield. Only few knew what this cloud was. Chemical warfare. The religious monarchy broke many, if not thousands of words and even articles in the Article of War, as well as many treaties that were signed before the war was even begun. On this day, thousands of troopers lay dead. Even tanker crews lay dead in their tanks, coughing up their own lungs and blood. However, Texas was prepared for this. They began issuing troopers being sent to the Eastern Front gas mask and chemical warfare equipment to fight again. And because of this preparation, they were able to take Pigeon Forge and secure a key supply route for the enemy. However, once again, the religious monarchy forces that were retreated launched another chemical attack, this time chlorine and mustard gas. And while the troopers could survive, one turned around and realized why they launched another gas attack, even though they knew that their enemy was prepared for it. They were killing civilians. A mass genocide to show their people that even with Texas, they're no longer safe from God's wrath. This display of horror was known as the Pigeon Genocide. Very few survived it. Even more had to be hospitalized, and even died on the table when doctors tried to save them. As such, this display of savagery and brutality only put more fire to the Texan spirit to end this war. For they now saw the true colors of the enemy they're fighting. They do not see the enemy as people now, they see them as monsters that need to be put down, as one Texan put it. As such, the war continued on for this, and each front turned into, like I said, its own living hell. On the east, there are nothing but trenches and gas attacks. On the west, we have a Vietnam-esque style of warfare, where even though we take an area, we're still fighting to hold it. And massive air cavalry attacks and even air support is very prevalent. To the south, we have a mix of naval and amphibious warfare, where even though we are working up the river, each beach landing is much more difficult than the last. And the war continues on to this day. The war has been going on for almost 7 years. And the only way to end it seems to be by putting an end to the religious monarchy itself and claiming the territory for Texas. However, this would have been easy if not for what the religious monarchy did, another stupid move on their part. For in 2016, they decide to bring in another player into the battlefield. But that, my friends, is a story for another day. Thank you all for watching. As always, I've been AirsoftAL, and if you want to help make more of these videos or help us out by donating to our Patreon, please do so by following the link above. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please consider following it below if I do upload it to YouTube. But either way, guys, I've been AirsoftAL, and I will see you guys in the next video. Until next time.
Company, always on the run. Destiny.